Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Anyone who's listening or watching on the Temple Beth Am podcast series. We are in the 10th book of Shemot, and we're still 10th chapter of Shemot, still focusing on the arbeh, on the locusts. We finished the stretch where Rashi is quiet, and where Rashi comes out. He has a long comment that we'll look at in a second that that we're going to read because we read every word, but we're not going to linger on it because it's basically medieval bad geography, and it's hard to read through knowing what we know about actually how things look in the Middle East. But we'll try to understand Rashi's understanding of it, and particularly what he was thinking about in terms of the verse itself.
Rashi actually drew a map of the Middle East.
He drew a map of the Middle East. How accurate was it?
It doesn't look much like a map, but it's like boxes next to each other.
Huh.
So you can see what Rashi thought where things were.
Well, maybe his comment will illuminate why it looks the way it does. It's not terrible, but it's not. We know better because we have satellites on our flat Earth. Okay, let's go. We're about to read verse 19. I'll read verse 18 just to move us into position. Verse 18 in chapter 10 was Vayetze me'im Paro, singular, and he left Pharaoh's presence, even though the two of them had been there, Moshe and Aaron. Vayatar el Adonai, and he pleaded with God, which is what Pharaoh had asked him to do. Also in the singular, the Aramaic Vayatar el Adonai is Vitzali Kadam Adonai. Tzali Tzadi Lamed Yud in Hebrew means to roast. Tzadi Lamed Yud in Aramaic means to pray, like Tikabel Sloton. May our prayers be received. So that's what we got. We've got Moshe, and really by inference, Moshe and Aaron having left Pharaoh's presence after Pharaoh had asked them to plead to God to remove the arbeh, and now we're on verse 19. Okay?
In 18, I'm still conflicted about, it's clear they prayed to God, they asked God. It's not so clear to me that they asked God to do what Pharaoh requested, so much as to ask God to do something. Instruct them, leave the locusts, put away the locusts, whatever God decides. It's just not very clear. Clearly, they prayed to God.
Right.
But it might have been one of those things where you just pray, please do your will.
Right. So the content of verse 18 is that there's a singular verb, a singular subject praying to God, but it's not, you're right, it doesn't fill in the information from verse 17, which is what Pharaoh wanted them to pray about. It's just a plea. Correct. It's left unsaid. Right? Yeah. That's Rashi's
map? Mm-hmm. Cool.
Send me a link to that, and then maybe I'll bring it onto the screen when we get to that, Rashi. Okay. Or you can put a link to it into the chat.
If you just search for Rashi map,
I know, but I'm sure.
Okay.
Okay. So verse 18. Alan, do you want to? Verse 19. You want to read?
V'yapoch Adonai ruach yam hazak ma'od v'yisa et ha'arbeh v'yikaehu yam ha'tzut lo nishar arbeh echad v'chol v'chol mitzrayim.
Okay.
Okay. And V'yapoch and God turned back. Ruach Yam Chazak, a strong wind, a very strong wind, and it carried the locusts, Ehu, and it. I don't know what that word means.
Okay, so we'll look at it together. So some kind of an action with the root is takat tafkuf ayin, right?
Okay. Whatever it did towards the Sea of Reeds, and not lo nishar arbeh echad, that there wasn't a single locust that remained in all of the borders of Egypt.
Okay, so whatever was the content of the prayer in verse 18, as Norm is saying, the prayer did not specifically include, or not told that it included what Pharaoh wanted to be included. The impact is what Pharaoh asked for, which is that the arbeh is gone, right? The verb v'yafoch is interesting here because lahafoch means to turn over. So it's hard to really know how to render, and God turned over. I mean, we know what it means. God brought and blew a ruach yam chazak, right? Literally a wind, a strong sea wind. Why v'yafoch? Interesting question. When Unkelus translates it into Aramaic, chooses to keep it that phrase v'hafach. So it must be that that it was common, that is a common verb to describe how wind is like brought forth. We can look at different translations in a second. Vayisa et ha'arbeh. The subject, what's the subject of the verb vayisa, Alan?
Wind.
The wind, right? So the ruach yam chazak bore, carried, right? No, remember that we actually anticipated this. If you look back in verse 17, it's very interesting that Pharaoh is asking Moses and Aaron through God to carry his sin, sanachatati, and now that same verb is being used to describe the removal of the arbeh. So carried, bore the locusts. Vayit ka'ehu yamasuf, something it towards the Sea of Reeds, right? So we get a reference to the Sea of Reeds well before the Israelites are going through it. Lo nishar arbeh echad, there was not a single remaining locust, b'chol gvul Mitzrayim. Okay. So we already have a couple of questions on the verb, right? One question on the verse is why the verb bayafo. One question you may ask is, what does it mean to say it's a ruach yam? Which sea? We want to know what taka means. Any other, before we try to answer those questions, any other questions you would have in the verse? Tova, is your hand coming up?
No questions. Well, it's a question of maybe what it meant. Because when I think of a ruach yam, of what we call a sea breeze, usually means it comes from the sea rather than towards the sea. So I'm wondering if yahafok turns over means the reversal of a normal phenomenon. Normally it would come from the sea, but he reversed it and instead it blew the arbeh towards the sea.
Interesting. So that would make Rashi's comment that we're going to read in a few minutes even harder to make sense of if that were the case. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's wrong, right? You're right. A sea wind usually means it comes from the sea. The basic understanding is that Yam here is the Yam HaTichon, the Mediterranean Sea, and that it's a wind from the Mediterranean Sea, which means if you're in the northeast corner of Egypt and a wind is coming from the Mediterranean, it's sort of blowing south or southeast, right? Or going in that direction. You're suggesting the Vayafoch means that it actually blew it out toward the sea, possibly. Let's look at the word taka means. I'm going to share with you on the screen the BDB. Okay, so taka, to thrust, to clap, to give a blow, and to blast, right? By the way, what root do we have? What word do you know that has this root? Tikia, same verb, right? A burst, a blast, something strong, right? Here it probably mean to, you translate as hurl, right? So it carried up the arbeh and it threw it, hurled it, blasted it in the same kind of energy that would be coming out of the other side of a shofar, right? And if you look at the screen here, right? So one of the words that BDB gives to help us understand taka is our exact example, vayit ka'ehu. Right? To pitch or to thrust. So the wind carried the arbeh, thrusted yamasuf, right? This makes it harder, Tova, to read it your direction because yamasuf, right? And this is what Rashi getting into, right? Towards the Sea of Reeds, which no matter what, it's east, right? It's where to the east, we're not sure, but to the east. So we're not sure exactly why the word vayafoch is used. Any other questions one would ask on the verse? Not answers, but questions. Rosemary?
I'm just observing that in the other plagues, Pharaoh was asking, like, go stop the plague. Here he doesn't ask. And is it the first time that Pharaoh shows he's kind of pleading to God? He starts recognizing. He doesn't say what he wants because he knows that God knows what he wants, and he's just asking. So it shows in a way that he starts believing in the God.
Well, we are definitely seeing a progression of Pharaoh. It's in the previous verse that God also, previous plague, Pharaoh also references his own sinfulness versus God's righteousness. He does ask for what he wants. If you look back at verse 17, he asks them to bear his sin this time, plead to God so that God will remove this deathly arbeh from me. So he is asking for what he wants, but perhaps we're slowly seeing Pharaoh move in the direction of understanding that God is the one with the true power, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to share with you a couple of translations to see how people deal with the word vayafoch. 1 second, Norm. Okay, Norm, 1 second. Okay. So if you look at the screen, so this is Everett Fox. Everett Fox wants to agree with you a little bit, Tova. Right? If you look at the screen, and God reversed an exceedingly strong sea wind, right? And then his comment, sea wind. The story is told from the perspective of the land of Israel, where such a wind means a west wind. He's translated as reverse because of the word mean. It's hard to understand how he would understand how a reverse wind would actually get the locust to the Sea of Reeds, which bore the locust away and dashed them into the Sea of Reeds. Okay, look, so other translations, 1 second. Translations. JPS. God caused a shift to a very strong wind, west wind. And maybe the shift is not one of direction, but some kind of strength caused, like it was a normal west wind, but God did something to it to have it have the power to remove the locusts. Corin, and the Lord turned a very strong west wind, meaning turned it towards Egypt, right, from where it was coming from. But Suda, Adonai turned a very strong westerly wind that carried away the locusts. And let's look at Charles Kahana. And the Eternal turned a very strong west wind, which carried the locusts. Every translation wants to make sense of the verb vayafoch, but no one's 100% sure why it means what it means.
Why are you translating it as west wind?
Because
Because you said it came from the Mediterranean, that would be north.
Right, because we actually mentioned this last week, that the Torah uses a vocabulary that was normative to the Hebrew speakers of the land of Israel, and it's like west wind. Yam Suf became a synonym for west wind because when you're land of Israel, the wind from the sea is the west wind, even if it doesn't make sense directionally within Egypt. Correct. Try to think of another example of that, where we have a word whose origin, we still use it even though its origin does not make it make sense in direction. Right, exactly.
The 4 directions, so Yama means west,
Yeah.
regardless of where you were.
Yeah.
Well,
Very good.
In English, we say orient yourself, which really means to turn east, but we use it
Very good.
in whatever direction you're
Very good.
orienting yourself.
I see a lot of hands on the side. So Stevie, and then we'll go down the line.
Just that verse 13 has Mihag Ruach Kadim Baris, and then the end of the verse, Haya Ruach Takadim, that it seems that we had established a wind in the opposite direction already, so reversal makes sense.
He reversed the winds to now become a westerly wind. Nice. That's actually, that's probably exactly right. Thank you for that. Norm.
I'm more interested in the other verb, is ka'ehu, because you liken it to a shofar. It's a very sudden blast. Nobody sees it coming. It isn't there's nothing gradual about it. All of a sudden, there's this huge wind. All the locusts leave. Everybody and anybody in the area, Israelite, Egyptian, whomever, would see this as a very supernatural event. There's this terrible plague of these huge locusts, and all of a sudden they are gone. There's no trace of them.
Yeah.
nothing to clean up.
It's a tekiah. It's a tekiah removal of the arba.
Yeah.
Nice, yeah. Norm, can you reach me a napkin over there?
Hmm?
Can you reach me a napkin?
What I use is clean.
Rick.
So a couple things. Yeah, when I see V'yahafok, it's like Purim. It's reversed. Everything's upside down. So whatever was normal is going the opposite way. So thank you to Stevie for verse 13 up there. I was gonna have us go to the actual crossing of the sea, and there it's Ruach Kadim Azah. So yeah, we can deal with this kind of stuff there, but there it was an east wind, Kadim, Ruach Kadim Azah Kol Halayla. And then, so, that we all know what happened there. So yeah, it depends on where you're standing, but I'm getting that, it's what everybody was saying.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Tova?
Picking up, as I was looking at the same verse, it also makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up a little bit, because in both of the verses, one Rick referred to, in this one, you referred to a wind affecting the sea. In this one, the wind is in one mighty blast, getting rid of all of the locusts, and we're going to pass through the sea, but in one mighty blast, the army of Egypt is going to be lost in the sea.
Yes, there's a lot, particularly in the locust plague, that anticipates in language and in imagery the Exodus more than the others. Yeah. Leading the witness a little bit, anything else in the verse that seems extraneous, like why do we need this information, isn't it self-evident? Just to set up one of Rashi's comments.
The Chazak Ma'od, you didn't really need the Ma'od there. I hear the echo of the shofar on Mount Sinai, Olech v'chazek Ma'od. So just intensifying it.
Well, it says that there's not even a remnant of the swarm. Do you need to have the Kol Gvul Mitzrayim?
Right. Or do we even lead, which is what Rashi to say, the whole phrase, Lo nishar be'echad b'chol gvul Mitzrayim, once we're told that strong wind picked up the arba in one thrust and cast it out into the Yam Suf, right? So just to be alert to the things that Rashi is going to be sensitive in the verse. Okay, so that's the verse. Let's look at Rashi on Ruach Yam. Alan, you're up.
Okay.
And speak a little bit louder, Alan. Maybe, I don't know if that microphone is working, but try to bring that a little bit closer to him in case it is.
Ruach Yam, Ruach Be'aravi.
Okay, so the first thing he says is basically going to Tova's question/point.
It's the wind from the west.
Right. So it's a stand-in. It's, again, the word orient is a perfect example. Ruach Yam means not a wind from the sea, but a wind from the west, because that's what it would have meant to the people living in the land of Israel when the Torah is given and studied originally as a text. Okay, go ahead.
Yam Suf to the Sea of Reeds. Omerani Sheyam Suf Haya Mikzato B'Ma'arav. I say that the Sea of Reeds was to the west of Eretz Yisrael.
Was a little bit of it to the west. It will be helpful in understanding Rashi's comment, even though Rashi's understanding of the geography is not exactly what ours is. Think of the Sinai Peninsula, and below the Sinai Peninsula is the actual Red Sea. But there's a body of water on both sides of the Sinai Peninsula, right? It's sort of like a snail's head, right? And so one side we now call, I guess, the Suez, the Gulf of Suez, and the other one is the Gulf of Aqaba, right? So what Rashi kind of knows that a little bit, and he's going to try to say, it'll be helpful if I tell you what he's going to say before he says it, That way it'll make a little more sense. I know that sounds weird. He's going to try to say that when the Torah refers to Yam Suf, it refers to kind of like the looping V or U body of water that goes on both sides of the Sinai Peninsula, of the Sinai, so that when something is in Egypt and can be thrust all the way eastward, it can be thrust and still be called the Yam Suf, whether it's immediately eastward of Egypt on the west side of the Sinai Peninsula, or even on the east side of the Sinai Peninsula. It's still the same body of water, which it is. It's probably not the Yam Suf, but it's probably, it's helping him make sense of the directionality here. So he says, I would like to say that this Yam Suf, some of it is on the west side of what?
The west side of Egypt.
No, the west side of Sinai, of the west side of what's on the other side of Egypt, right? Meaning immediately to the east of Egypt. So the west side of the Sinai Peninsula. Keep going. Keneged.
Keneged kol ruach dromit. Keneged opposite all of the southern side.
Right. So if you think about it, if you're in the Sinai Peninsula and you go to the coast and where that body of water is, it's opening you up to the whole southwest of that part of the land of Israel. Keep going. Gam. And also,
it was also in part to the east of Eretz Yisrael.
The eastern side of the Sinai Peninsula, which we call the Gulf of Aqaba, which ultimately gets up to Eilat and then across to Jordan, Saudi Arabia, right? So he's trying to make sense of this with his understanding of the map, which is slightly different than ours. Go ahead. Lefichach, therefore.
Lefichach, Ruach Yam, therefore, the west wind, Tika'u la'arbe beyama suf, that it thrusts the locust into the Sea of Reeds.
Kenegdo,
Kenegdo,
the part of the Sea of Reeds that was immediately next to it, which is the Gulf of Suez, right? V'chein
matzinu le'inyan techumin. And also we find that the Torah says, with respect to the inyan, to the matter of tchum, the area, so it would be the borders.
Right. We have verses in the book of Shemot and later on the Torah that has God laying out essentially the map. In biblical language, the borders of the land of Israel. So he says we have something similar in this regard when we actually are going to get to the verses regarding the Tchumim. Shehu
foneh letzad mizrach.
What's the who here? Who's the who?
Foneh letzad mizrach. It's got to be that Sea of Reeds.
Correct. That the Yam Suf also turns Litzad Mizrach, to the eastern side of the land of Israel, both sides of the Sinai Peninsula. Shenamar, as it says. So pause there. Everyone just turn forward to 23:31. If you all have the book of Shemot, so it should be right there. I shouldn't have to pull it up on the screen because you'll have that. Chapter 23. Okay, towards the end of Parshat Mishpatim, to which you're all invited to a lovely bar mitzvah this year. Okay, so if we look back at verse 30, Ma'at argashenu, slowly, I'm going to kind of expel them, mipanecha, from your presence, ad asher tifreh, until you're able to multiply v'nachalta ta'aretz, and you will inherit the land. V'shati et gvulcha, I will set your borders, miyam suf, from the Sea of Reeds, ad yam plishtim. So yam plishtim, where are the Philistines? Right, they're on the Mediterranean coast, which means that they're on the western side of the land of Israel. So if it's from X, to the western side, X must be the eastern side. So he's saying this is a verse that proves that you can use Yam Suf to refer to the body of water, not just immediately east of Egypt, western side of Sinai, but it's got to be also the eastern side of Sinai. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense as a directional point here, even internal to the logic of the verse. Okay. So go back to Rashi. We just quoted the verse. Miyam Suf v'yad yad plishtim. Keep going. Mimizrach. Marav. So if Yam Plishtim, we just said this, represents Marav, west, then Yam Suf must represent east. And it's a different way of thinking of Yam Suf as than the first body of water you hit leaving Egypt. This is now the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. It's the farther east side. Okay. Hold on. Yeah. 1 second, Alan. Yeah. Toba?
How does, if he's associating, you're saying the Gulf of Aqaba with Yam Suf?
Correct.
Then how were they crossing the Gulf of Aqaba?
He's saying Yam Suf is both. Yam Suf is the V, right? Okay. I shouldn't assume that everyone has the instant map recall that I do. So let me just pull it up. Even so, let me just pull it up so we know exactly what we're talking about. All right.
There's a notation in here, Rabbi. I think that'd be helpful. They have a little map, and it says, according to Rashi, both the Gulf of Eilat and the Gulf of Suez, offshoots of the Red Sea, are included in the term Yam Suf.
Correct. So everyone look at the screen, right? So there, you see my cursor, they're hanging out over here. We normally think of crossing the Yam Suf as something here, the immediate border from Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. But it's being used in the verse to describe the locusts as being pulled way from over here all the way to an area on this side, which is still being called Yam Suf. And in the verse that we looked at from Parashat Mishpatim, God said the border is going to be from Yam Suf to Yam Plishtim. Well, the from, therefore, has to be east. And so Rashi is saying that all of that is, at least by the Torah, understood to be Yam Suf. It can mean on both east or the west side of that triangle. Yes, Leonard.
According to Rashi's map,
Yeah.
Yam Suf continues all the way up to Yam HaMelech.
Basically the Jordan River.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Did you?
Well, that's basically the Rift Valley.
Can I show something on the map?
Yeah, I'm.
1 second. Rashi map. What did you Google to find that? Rashi map.
This Rashi map.
Okay.
The hand-drawn one's hard to read, but the one I sent you has the cleaned up a bit so you can read it. Yeah, expand it.
So
That's Israel.
So you can see on the right side there, it says Yam Suf, and it keeps going all the way up,
Yeah.
the other direction. Up,
yeah, except that this is turned 90 degrees because Yam HaGadol here is south, but Yam HaGadol is clearly west because that's the Mediterranean Sea. So this, yeah.
Continue up on Yam Suf, you get to Yam HaMelech and the Yarden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's weird.
Okay. Yes.
Can I show something on the other one that you have?
On just the map?
Yeah.
Yeah. 1 second.
So I just wanted to throw in something weird. So most people think we crossed there, right? The Sea of Reeds, where it's swampy, right? And the chariots can't go and blah, blah, blah. But I heard online, which doesn't mean anything, there's a very narrow place here, and they found chariots and they found things right here, that there was a narrow spot. And this is where Midian was, and there was a mountain over here. So some people think Mount Sinai was over here, where Yitro was and stuff. But it was a 3-day journey, right, that we walked, and then the taskmaster said, hey, they're not coming back. So then they started chasing them. So it depends on how far you think they could walk in 3 days or however many days. And most people think Mount Sinai is here. But anyway, so the wind is going back and forth.
Okay. So back to the Rashi, Alan. I know that we're spending actually more time on this than I thought we would, but I wanted to get through it. So he's quoted the verse from Mishpatim that seems to suggest that Yam Suf can be used as an Eastern geographical marker. Okay. Right. Since Yam Plishtim is in the west, therefore Yam Suf must be in the east. And then he quotes a verse from Tzefania, which is only interesting because no one ever quotes Tzefania. So Tzefania is happy that someone's quoting him, so we might as well bring him up, because it's just you're going to live a long life until someone quotes Tzefania to you again. So this is
You said that the last time.
how long ago was that? It's actually not such a helpful verse. I don't know why Rashi is quoting it, but basically it's a verse in the second chapter of Tzefania referring to a prophecy of doom against the Philistines and other enemies that were hanging out on the western side of Israel. Hoi Yoshvei Chevel, all of you who live. Chevel means like a strip of land, Gaza, right? Chevel Hayam, who live on that strip of land by the sea. Goy Kretim, the Kreti nation, who I don't know much about, but one of Tzefania's way of referring to those peoples. Devar Adonai Alechem. What?
People from Crete, maybe.
Maybe. Was that a dog? I was like, what is on my?
Yes.
I'm scratching my leg, and I'm feeling pressure and wetness. I'm like, am I bleeding? No, it's a dog, and I don't mind it. I just, when you don't know what it is, like, what's happening? Do I have to go to the hospital? Maybe Crete, except that I think that this verse is understood to be the strip of land on mainland.
Is the people that
Could be.
They were moving all around.
Interesting. I don't know the etymology of Crete and how old a word that is. I don't know if that's a biblical word. Could be.
Rabbi, there's a comment that says in Tanakh, the word Hayam, the sea, without any further description, always means the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Which is to the west of Eretz Yisrael.
Right. So keep looking at the verse. Devar Adonai Lechem, the word of God is upon you. Canaan Eretz Plishtim, right? Oh, Canaan and land of Philistines. So it's basically saying that when God gives a prophecy against the Plishtim, God is referring to them as the people living on that strip of the sea, which is the western side. I'm sure there are other verses that do a better job of proving that a reference to the Plishtim is west. Okay. What Rashi has done with all of this, and that's the end of his comment, is to say the locust went from land of Egypt all the way, not just a little bit east to where we think the Sea of Reeds would have been in terms of their crossing, but all the way on the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. Why is all that significant? Aside from Rashi just working out the geography in his mind, or maybe he's trying to make sense of how powerful and how forceful this removal was. It wasn't just to the borders of Egypt. It was way over there. That's the Birkei Ehud, something like that. Okay. Anything else on that, Rashi? Now let's read a much more midrashic answer to the question that I kind of suggested we all ask, which is, why do we need the phrase that there wasn't any locust left if God had removed all of them? You have a comment?
Is it kind of like the Joseph in the pit, and
it's going to be similar to that?
Empty, and there wasn't any snakes. So if it was empty, there wasn't any water. So if you
Habor Reik Ein Bo Mayim.
Yeah. So why do you have to say if there's no water? Because there was other things there. There were snakes, nasty things.
It's the classic engine of midrash, right? The verse didn't have to say this. Why did it? Opens you up to endless possibilities, right? So what does Rashi say here on Lo Nishar Arbe Echad, Alan?
Lo Nishar Arbe Echad, not a single locust remained. Af Ameluchim Shebalchu Mehem. Even the salted Meluchim, the salted locusts.
Salted locust?
The salted locust.
Sounds like a name of a good punk rock band.
Yeah. The salted Meluchim that
Who
that they had made for themselves.
Right. Who had salted what and why?
The Egyptians salted them to eat them.
Yeah. Right.
Salted them to eat them. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Popcorn. Good roughage. And as you know, when we get to the laws of kashrut later on the Torah,
Yeah.
there are some insects that are treif and some insects that are kosher. The only reason why the Torah would need to distinguish them is if it was something that was edible. And we know there are cultures to this day that eat insects, right? They're actually probably, no matter what our reaction to them is in terms of food aesthetics, they're probably healthy calories, right?
I mean, the Egyptians were now keeping kosher.
I don't know if they're keeping kosher, but what's the content of this midrash that Rashi is delivering as pshat? Not only did the swarm of locusts that were devouring the crops get, but this vayid ka'ehu, this western wind, this sea wind, was non-discriminatory and took every locust, even the ones that are, even the yummy ones that was sold for eating, right? And this is also evocative of Exodus night, right? Once the 10th plague is released, right? The classic question of you would ask of an omnipotent God on the night of Exodus, why do you need the blood on the lintel? If God is sending the 10th plague, can't God give the angel of death GPS coordinates as to where to go, where not to go? And the classic midrashic answer, which is actually a really important sermon, is that once the destroyer is released, it's hard to rein in. Think about that in any aspect of your life. Once you release such a destructive force, it is very hard for the one who released it to have a target exactly and only whom you want to target. It's indiscriminate, right? Once you release anger, it's very hard for it only to land in the right place, right? Once you release envy, same thing. So here, once this Ruach Yam was released to get rid of the Arba, it got rid of all the Arba, not just the Arba that Pharaoh wanted to get rid of, but this is again Pharaoh like tripping on himself. You want me to get rid of the Arba? Okay, I'll get rid of the Arba. You now have 20% less food in Egypt because you're relying on some of the Arba in your storehouses. Yeah. Something like that. Alan and Rebecca.
Okay. There could be a question about Arba Echad. Why do you need Echad? If you're just going to say you got rid of all the Arba, why do you need Echad? And there's a comment here that was referred both to and about not a single locus image. Alternatively, Rashi might be explaining the implication of the word echad. The verse is no longer using arba as a collective noun referring to the plague of locusts, but refers to the individual locust, which has significance only when viewed as food.
Yeah. Not a single locust, opposed to the swarm is gone, but not even a single locust that you would want to interact with as a locust for food is there. Rebecca, and then I see Renee as a comment. Yeah. Oh, bye, Renee. Be well.
I was going to comment, the salted locusts makes me think they were preserved with salt, like people would do with meat and things, and so they were dead and in the storehouses, so they weren't even live, but they were dead. And
yeah.
So even those were taken off.
Yeah. So it's like, once again, who's in charge? Pharaoh might think, oh, I asked them to go plead to God. They're leaving me. I'm seeing them praying. God's responding. I'm the one in power. I asked them to remove the locusts, but not those locusts. We wanted those locusts, right? So the midrash is built on a very thin string. Like, why do we need that phrase? As if the Torah is not allowed any redundancy. But the impact of the midrash is once again showing the reversal of the power, or the reinforcement that every time that Pharaoh thinks he's in charge, he's getting what he's asked for. He's also getting what he doesn't ask for, or he's getting the opposite of what he asked for. Good. Larry, how's the trial? Is the whole jury listening to this? He can hear.
No, I'm just walking into the to the court area, so I'll turn my camera off in a minute.
Okay, guilty. That's what I want to say. I don't care what the evidence is. He's on a jury. Okay, good. Tova.
It's obvious from what we talked about before, but part of what the effort that Rashi is making to place the place to which the locusts were blown in the Gulf of Aqaba by us, that it does say Gevul Mitzrayim, and at many times, including today, that was the Gevul Mitzrayim, that was the boundary of Egypt. So if you were really going to take them all the way out of Egypt, they had to be taken that far.
Good.
And in the time of
and also modern, because it's now Egypt again
today as well. And in the time of Ramesses, if that's the time we're talking about, a good part of the Sinai, at the very least, was under Egypt. They had
Yeah.
mining camps and settlements there.
So this verse would not obtain between 1967 and 1982
But,
when we had Sharm el-Sheikh. Yes.
but elsewhere, it says the border is Nachal Mitzrayim.
Nachal Mitzrayim. I wonder what they think of it. What's Nachal
Which could
Mitzrayim?
be the Nile, or it could be the wadi that goes through it, Wadi al-Arish.
Where's that?
It's in the Sinai,
Yeah.
it goes into the Mediterranean.
Yeah, the 2.5 places that the borders of Israel are mentioned in the Torah are not 100% consistent,
Yeah.
right?
Well, borders aren't consistent, so
Borders aren't consistent, right? If you take a biblical critical approach to it, like those texts may have been written at different times, in which case they really was representing different areas of the land of Israel, right? And we don't,
Or
and-
different aspirations.
different aspirations, and we don't, I mean, geography is obviously very significant and locus is very significant to our story, but in general, we read Torah not for geography lessons, but for meaning, right? Okay, great. Excellent work, Alan. Let's go to
Even today, there are those who live in a lot and celebrate 2 days of Yontif because they may not have been in the historic land of Israel.
Mamash.
Mamash. Taka.
That's that's a known thing that there are people who do 2 days of Yontif and a lot.
Somebody talked with me once about going to Israel for Egypt, and I said, well, I have to go down to Eilat for at least the first few days.
Wow.
'Cause
Eilat's
I
really
wanna
not
miss the
Israel.
second Seder.
Okay.
Yeah, Mamash.
Let's go to verse 20, which is going to be a familiar verse because we've done verses like that. Let's see. We have a name on the Zoom, Dina Cap Z. Do we know who that is? Do I know who that is?
Yeah.
Dina, if you're there and you want to introduce yourself.
It's Baruch Kaplan.
Oh, hey, Bara, how are you? Got it. Okay.
Ina is my daughter.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Good to not. It would be good to see you, but it's also good to have you here, even unseen. Okay, Rick, do you want to read verse 20?
Sure. Vayikazik Adonai et lev Paro v'lo shilach et bnei Israel. God strengthened, hardened, however you want to translate that, the heart of Pharaoh, and he didn't send the children of Israel.
Okay, so any one of us could have written that verse, right? Because we've seen versions of this verse. Rashi's quiet on the verse. Not only is Rashi quiet, most commentators are quiet. Meaning most of them read it as a use of this verse that doesn't even bear mentioning because it doesn't even seem to them to be an interesting or different use of this idea that is in the category of Ze Omer Darsheni. This says drash me out. I want to share with you one comment. There are a few, but they're not that interesting. Does anyone want to hazard their own interesting comment as to, aside from what the verse means, we know what it means, but the significance of this verse being placed exactly here in the story in terms of antecedent and things like that? Yes, Rick?
Okay, so I just went back to see the last time that happened. So on 9:35, at the end of Vayera, the same Vayechazak lev Paro v'lo shilach et bnei Israel. So there they add, or the Torah adds, Kasher diber Adonai biad Moshe. Just as God said, by the hand of Moses, however you want to translate that. So those extra 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words aren't here. I was just going to raise the question: why aren't those 5 words here? So,
okay, so it's not every version of this verse is slightly different. Yeah, Stevie.
Well, I think in this particular case, it divides the plague from the following plague in a narrative relevant way, because the next plague has no story about it coming about, and if without these 5 words, we would literally just have, and they removed this plague, and God said to Moses, bring the next plague.
Right.
And what would Pharaoh think if that was literally the sequence was, you asked us to get rid of this, and then we but there was plague last time I saw you, there's plague this time I see you. Right. Whereas here it's clear that, the bringing about the next plague is a response to Pharaoh's response, or what, right? There's a separation.
Very good. Sometimes verses don't make sense unless you consider the previous verse, and sometimes verses don't make sense unless you consider the following verse, right? And the commentary we're going to read in a second by the Hamek Davar, by the Netziv, without saying it explicitly, is saying that. And it's particularly the case because if you look, depending on which Chumash you're looking at, there's a Parsha break here, right? So if you're looking in the Torah scroll, right? I don't remember if it's a Petucha or a Stuma, if it's closed or open, but so it's Petucha, right?
Yeah.
So it means that line is all open, which means we're ending a scene. But the first piece of information, if you cheat in the next verse, as Stevie said, is already the next plague. No warning, no more encounter between Pharaoh and Moshe. So you would, if you didn't have this verse, you would want to know what happened in between the removal of the Arba. There should have been another story, another narrative, another slice to it. But all of a sudden, ninth plague. Why is ninth plague coming? It must have been in response to this hardening of the heart. Let's look at the Netziv on this. I'll share the screen unless someone else wants to see something on the verse itself. Tova?
I have a question that maybe he'll address, but I'm just curious because the Silberman translation is, but the Eternal allowed Pharaoh's heart to be hardened so that he would not let the children of Israel go, which seems highly interpretive given the words. And I'm just wondering if there's anything in it that other than squeamishness with the obvious meaning of the words.
I think it's some squeamishness. I think that all other translators are deep in the theological bramble of what it means, as we said 100 times, right? As we've gone through this, for God to be the hardener and then God to be the punisher of the hardening.
Well, especially here when it's like boom, boom.
Boom, boom. Right.
Yeah.
Right. God hardens his heart and then immediately there's a punishment for that. So the let it hard slightly softens.
Yeah.
Right? Rick?
Again, I want to quote Rabbi Jack Reamer. I learned a long time ago, it wasn't that God was actually hardening the heart, it was just God. Pharaoh prayed for strength from the gods, and so he got strength to have his position, and that was what he was doing. He was just more resolved. He was strengthening his own heart. He wanted to be able to make a decision and not waver on it.
Yeah.
It was that kind of dynamic.
Look at the screen if you're in the room, or on the screen if you're on the Zoom. Vayachazek Adonai. This is Hamek Davar, the commentary of the Netziv, late 19th century, early 20th century, Eastern Europe, Volozhin, on the verse. Vayachazek Adonai v'gomer. Ba'asher lo haya kan makom litot. Something like in the fact that there was no space here to err, meaning Pharaoh hasn't done anything else wrong yet, right? Klal, because there was no time, kamo b'chol makot, like there had been in the aftermath of the removal of the previous plagues. Mishum hachi, because of that, kativ vayachazek Adonai. It must be, so the Hamek Davar is explaining why this is God's hardening the heart and not Pharaoh. There wasn't time for Pharaoh to harden his heart. There was no sin that he committed. So it's almost as if it's actually, instead of softening it by the translation you read, Tove, it's actually hardening the hardening. God wants to bring the ninth plague, but God needs a pretext. So the eighth plague is removed, and God says, I got darkness all teed up, right? But I can only bring darkness in response to another recalcitrance. Pharaoh doesn't seem to have a hard heart right now. He actually has been positively overwhelmed by the Arbeh. I know what I can do. I'm actually obviously adding, but I think Hamek Davar is saying, I'll harden his heart. And as soon as heart is hardened, then I'll have an excuse to bring the darkness. It's something like that. Because of that, God is the one that hardened his heart. Ukfar be'arnu, we'll already explain, shelo haya bazeh ol chas v'shalom. Hamek Davar, in very terse words, is really trying to get to the theological conundrum. We've already explained that you should not think of this as an ol. What's an ol?
Yoke.
A yoke. Don't think of this chas v'shalom, that Pharaoh is a beast of burden, and there's a yoke upon his neck, and he has no control, no free will. I know it looks that way, reader, that God is the one who is hardening his heart, and then about to punish him for the hardening, don't think of Pharaoh as being not his own agent here, not having agency. Achar, because sheblize, without this individual moment of a somewhat faux artificial hardening of the heart, nigzar alehem mita, they've already all been decreed for death, because they had sinned already. And I think what he's getting is that any horror that is brought upon Egypt by God is due, whether or not there's the immediate antecedent to Pharaoh hardening his heart. And why is it due to them? Because of slavery. Right? It doesn't, right? It's not exact analog, but if I'm trying to think of a analog that won't be so heated, right? It's the southern and northern white men who enslaved black people for hundreds of years. Their punishment was due even on a day that was not immediately following a day that they were enslaving someone, right? That your guilt stays with you until the final punishment, even if there's been a gap in between when you incurred the guilt. So might it be that in this scene, Pharaoh didn't do anything between plague 8 and plague 9 to earn plague 9? And that in this scene, God is the instrument hardening his heart? Fine. But don't think of poor Pharaoh. He is sinful, and he has the death penalty on him from way before. Whether or not that answer is satisfying morally, to me, it's satisfying that the Netziv is trying to handle the moral question, right? Trying to handle the discomfort that we all have every time we come across this, right? Pharaoh earned his death penalty already. The question is how? How's it going to come about? Something like that. Rosemary.
Even if God hardens his heart in that situation, maybe we have been in situations like that. We have still the choice to change it to ask God, please open my heart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he could have immediately sent the people out. So he didn't. So he knew what he was doing.
Correct. Or he could have known what he was doing, and if he chose not to know, then it was his choice. Good. Okay, Leonard.
What you just had up, what was the mem shin he?
Mishum hachi, because of that. Mishum hachi, because of this. Okay, let's go to verse 21. Unless there's anything else in verse 20. Okay. Rebecca, you want to read verse 21?
Okay. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Netei yadcha al hashamayim, vayihi choshech al eretz Mitzrayim, vayamesh choshech. And God said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, and that there may be darkness on the land of Egypt.
And now we got a really interesting two-word phrase, interesting because of what really the verb means.
Well, this translation says, even darkness which may be felt.
Even darkness which may be felt. Which translation is that? Got it. It's working hard, right? Because it's trying to make sense of the word vayamesh, which I'm going to show you an earlier place in the Torah where the verb appears. Even darkness which may be felt is clearly not a direct translation of a vav hayipuch verb and an object, but it's trying to make sense of what is being described. So I'm going to share the screen. This is in Parshat Toldot. This is the scene where Jacob tricks Isaac and pretends to be Esau, right? And this is I think this may be the first place in the Torah, or one of the first places in the Torah where this root is used. Right. Vayomer Yitzchak el Yaakov. Isaac said to Jacob, whom Isaac thought was Esau, Kishana, come close, ve'am mushcha, I will mash you. So what does it mean in context? Feel, touch. You'll be tangible. There'll be something tactile, it'll be palpable, right? The whole scene is so intimate because he's bringing his son towards him and he's feeling around. He feels the hirsute nature of the body that convinces him that it's Esav and not Jacob, right? So the root mem vav shin means something real and you can feel. In fact, I used the word for it, mamash. What does mamash mean? It means really. It's the same root. It's realness. It's something of substance, right? So if you try to put that into vayamesh choshech, right? The translation that Rebecca read is trying hard. Even a darkness that can be felt. First of all, the question is grammatically, is the subject of the verb vayamesh God and the object is choshech, or is the subject of the verb vayamesh choshech, in which case it's kind of like an intransitive verb, something like that there will be darkness on the land of Egypt, and the darkness will be felt, feelable, real, right? Substantive, which is so interesting because, right, we think of darkness as just the absence of light. And this is the Torah trying to say in 2 words that whatever you think of a darkness, it ain't this. This is not the lights went out. This is not, a really, a cloudy, no star, no moon night. This is a different kind of choshech. Alan.
Yeah. Aren't there some midrashim that talk about it was like the thickness of the darkness? It's really mamash thick.
Correct. Right. So we're going to get to that in Rashi and some other commentaries. Rashi has a bunch of things to say on that. But just the way the darkness is introduced is to tell you, the reader, that you associate darkness with the power of sight or lack thereof. I, the Torah, am using a verb to introduce this plague that has nothing to do with vision. It has everything to do with palpability. Rick, last comment?
Do we see the BDB on the
Next week.
Okay. Oh, we're out of time?
Out of time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
All right.
Have a good week, everybody. Great to be back with all of you.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.